Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this ShipTech session, Making Data Work for Shipping, brought to you by the Maritime Online series. I'm Gary Howard, Europe Editor at Seatrade Maritime News, and I'll be your host and moderator for this 60-minute discussion on digitalization of the maritime sector. Let me start by thanking our esteemed panel, who I can see backstage raring to go. We've got some great expertise there, and we're going to cover this from quite a few different angles. I'd also like to thank our conference partners for today's session, Inmarsat and IO Currents, and our affiliate sponsor, DP World. Quick housekeeping notes to start off with. Our panel would like today's session to be a discussion with you, the audience involved. So we encourage you all to use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of the broadcast. If you're full screen, minimize that and you'll see the Q&A. It's just there. I'm personally monitoring the questions, so I'll keep a good eye on them and I'll pass them over to the panel for you. We'll answer as many as we can. If you're worried about taking notes, don't panic. It's all available on demand straight after we're finished. Share it with colleagues who couldn't make the broadcast today. That'd be great. That's enough of me for now. Let's bring in the panel and jump right into it. Hello, speakers. I won't run through and do long intros of everyone. There are bios here on the website that you can find in the speaker list. I find reading out bios to be quite boring. So I will start with a question to each of the panelists just so they can introduce themselves and sort of lay out their topics. And we're going to jump first to Jesse Brink, CEO of IO Currents. Jesse, why don't you start with the elevator pitch for IO Currents for anyone who isn't familiar with the brand, so we know where you're coming from, and then share with us what you think our data can do for us.
Sure. So IO Currents, we're kind of the data guys, where we see data as a means to an end, and so we're focused primarily on vessel health and performance. That's our area of expertise. We read your entire vessel's data outputs on sub-second bases, and rather than just collecting and visualizing that, we try and put that into the answer sets that are actionable, whether it's compliance and regulatory related, reporting and automation, or maintenance and engineering, scheduling recommendations, all the way through, operations from voyage efficiency and emissions. And then we go into the fancy AI and ML buzzwords a bit on producing outputs like actually proactively predicting failures before they happen based on the performance of the vessel and the subsystems, and optimizing voyages based on a litany of variables that are going on that voyage, but making proactive recommendations on the voyage to save on fuel. So that's kind of our spiel, is we're the guys trying to do something with your data to make you more productive. For the second part, where are we at, I guess, from this digitalization and data journey in the industry? It's really great question for the entire panel. I think you've got a great group here from Olav and Rob, who are really the data producers and consumers, to the Inmarsats that are making that accessible through Dan doing the cybersecurity. How do we then, IO Currents, take all of that data and make something actionable out of it? From the technology perspective, 10, 15 years ago in the tech space outside of maritime, big data was the sexiest thing you could talk about, really, until everybody got it. And then they realized they used to be able to run their entire business on these thumbnail snapshots. And they knew these thumbnail snapshots were 6 weeks old, and they may be riddled with some human error here and there, but they were 78% close enough, and they could make decisions on how to move forward. And then they thought, let's collect more data, and more data will make these thumbnail snapshots more accurate. And then they got these huge blown up images where a thumbnail snapshot used to do. So now in the tech world, you really see AI and ML being the buzzwords around, and the reason for that is that's just the technology that's available today to make sense of the big data sets, to give you the answers that you're used to running your business off of, and making predictions for you that the human eye can't keep up with based on all the accessible data. And I think that the maritime industry is poised right now to leapfrog an entire generation of the technology, the big data generation that was very expensive and very laborious to make sense of, because maritime has incredibly advanced assets that are producing copious amounts of data. It's just, what do we do with it? Well, rather than collecting it all and then hiring analysts and trying to build out dashboards, why don't we apply the latest and greatest technology to get us to those answer sets? So that's what we're focused on. And we're, again, primarily focused on the vessel health and performance and fleets. And that's us. And that's where I think the world is, and where I think we could be going.
Thanks, Jesse. I think there's a lot there that we're going to come back to in the various topics that we cover. I'm going to throw to Olav next, as I think he's coming from a slightly different angle here. Before this session, we discussed port turnaround efficiency and improving document handling as two key areas that were on your mind. Why don't you expand on those and any other thoughts that are on your mind?
Thank you. Just gonna, I'm gonna, as you said, gonna be coming from a slightly different angle than Jesse. I think we are a data producer. At the same time, we also managing assets. So Tom is a traditional ship manager in many ways. That's part of what we do. And we have assets of various age and type and size and all that. So kind of we get the data from different sources, kind of a rather new, and the newer one is more kind of tuned to this, whereas the other one maybe need more equipment and all that. But the whole question we are dealing with is, it's all looking from we look at it from a supply chain perspective. A vessel producer is part of a supply chain. Around the vessel itself also there is a supply chain activity. We have to deliver goods, services, lube oil, fuel oil, people, all that at the same time in the same port normally. So kind of we need to tune the activity around, okay, how we do this efficiently, how do we make sure the vessel is trading optimal, how do we get everything arranged, where we get arranged, where is the most efficient way of doing it. And some of this is data driven, some of it is connecting a lot of parties in that, and part of those we have control of, and some is provided by somebody else. So from a management perspective, we are looking at it on how can we become really efficient, because sailing from A to B is, there are weather routing, there's weather ways of doing it, and we get the charter has their opinion of where we want to go and all that. So okay, that's fine, that can be do. But in the port itself, there's a lot to be done on this. At the same time, the COVID has also showed us that we may are moving quicker away from documents, paper, to digitalization, and at least digital documents, and all the way to the digitalization age. How do we minimize the flow of information? How we minimize the paper flow, and how we and COVID in the pandemic, we have moved to a more digitalized world. At the same time, we still have a lot of them based on paper. I know there is a lot of activity going down to create blockchains and electronic bill of lading and all of that. We just need to continue on to make sure that we don't have to have those interaction with this paper-based. And we also see something else that we can't, there's been a limited possibility to travel for quite a while. So how do we interact with the vessel? What are the best means of doing that? How can we limit it? For example, emails, reducing it. Can we use standard technology like Office 365 to get some of these things done? And those things are what we kind of spend time and effort on, and has helped us through part of the challenge that the pandemic has given us. So I think there is more to do, and and I agree with Jesse, we are in a starting phase of something here that's going to accelerate as we move forward. We are not going to lose those learning. We have to capture those learning from the pandemic and take the winners when they're taking the next step. So I think there's a lot to do, and there's a lot for us, all of us, to work on. And I'm sure and we also see that there are numerous solutions out there. The question is, how do you all tie this together at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think as well, tying things together, communicating better is something that Rob Harrison from DP World is gonna cover. Rob, you've been involved in quite a few digital projects across your career. What's top of DP World's agenda when it comes to digitalization?
Yeah, Gary, thanks very much. From our perspective, I think we need to understand how we can create value with data. Of course, we are primarily actually infrastructure fixed asset investors, right? So most of our portfolio today is invested in the cranes, in the terminals, in inland rail products, et cetera, et cetera. So we're very much invested in that actual physical side of the supply chain, from the port, as the goods then find their way towards the customer, the end destination, right? So we are asset heavy, and of course we realize that we need to understand how are we going to be able to add more value to our business and to our customers' businesses using data, right? So we are looking at it at those two perspectives, and it's really, it's intuitive from an efficiency perspective. That's where it can create value for ourselves and to the customer, because if we can have more efficient processes, that we can also pass on to the customer. But then also the other side of it, which I think is maybe more intriguing, where there's a little bit more of a discussion, is really around this transparency. How do we create this transparency towards the end user? I mean, if you think about the supply chain that we all play in, the number of intermediaries and the number of players that actually participate in the supply chain is amazing. From when you look at the whole flow from goods from end to end, there's probably 10, 12 intermediaries on either end of the ocean leg, and each one of those intermediaries has different processes and has a different role to play. So the amount of information and the amount of information points that are actually being passing on from one to another is just mind blowing. And of course, so when we look at it, another way of trying to slice this thing is that we have, on the one side, you have a global processes, because goods flow from point A to point B, and they could be halfway around the planet. And yet, on the other side, you also have a whole lot of processes that are very, very local, very bespoke to that particular location, be that because of customs processes or legislation or the physical design of the terminal, whether it's a port that is upriver or one that is on the ocean, depending on weather patterns, et cetera. So there's a whole lot of these sort of things that we're looking at. So from DP World's perspective, we're trying to approach this from both sides. Both from the global side, we're trying to see how do we create these platforms or these digital products that could be used on a global perspective, while on the other end also looking at the local areas where how do we even look at a truck dispatch or a vehicle booking system or a call-up system that might be very bespoke to a local terminal operator. Those are the areas that we're sort of grappling with, and sitting behind all of this, it's this idea of the value of data, and how do you, because data is not free. Yes, you can give your information away, you can give data away, but it's never really free. So it's how do you actually extract the best value to you? Now, sometimes we say, yeah, you can have free access to my data, but you're only doing that for some other purpose, right? So we're grappling with this idea of how do we actually link this idea of data, information, and link it back to being able to extract that the value of that data linking to our assets, because our assets are the ones that actually pick up the container, put it on a ship, put it on a truck, let it leave the gate, etc. So those are a bit of the questions that we're grappling with at the moment. But like I said, we're trying to go at it from both a local bespoke approach, where at that local terminal, that local facility, and we're trying to come at it from the other side, from a global side as well. That's really the things that we're looking at, and very interested to see how it all evolves.
I think the value of data that you mentioned there is definitely something we're going to come back to, because from where I see it, Jesse perhaps comes at it from a slightly different angle, because the data itself is perhaps less valuable than the insight that you can gain and how valuable that insight is. But before we get into all of that, we're chucking all this data around. We need some sort of communications technology to get it from A to B. Alberto, connectivity is the backbone of all we're talking about here. I expect you've seen quite a big increase in demand for bandwidth in the recent year or two. Is that the case? What sort of data are we sending back and forth, and how is Inmarsat keeping up with this demand?
Yeah, thanks, Gary, for the question. It's an excellent question. And actually, we all witnessed last year after the pandemic outbreak how digitalization started to be on the top of agenda. So at the end of the year, we decided to look backwards and see if from the data that we collect in our networks, we could see patterns. And actually, if we compare the average volume of data downloaded from an average vessel in April against October, there was 100% increase in data consumption in the last 6 months. And if we go one step beyond and we drill down what this data was used for, it was very interesting that, of course, the lion's share was crew welfare. And I would like to take the opportunity of this conference to once more give tribute to the seafarers of the world. It's been a year tremendously difficult for them, and we from Inmarsat are proud, humbled, and honored to have been able to improve the welfare by providing connectivity, helping them to stay in touch with the families, and several programs that we put in place as mitigation. Then we've seen also a significant increase in business use, and this is related to what we just mentioned, and we will see across today, I'm sure, that the pandemic meant an acceleration of certain trends that they were already in the market, but that had to be implemented rather quickly. And someone said the industry has evolved in a year what it was meant to do in 5. And last but not least, digitalization. All these applications traffic, we've seen a lot more of increase. So picking up from your last question, how we can keep up with this growth in demand? Are we ready to support this growth? And the answer is definitely yet. And I just want to highlight a fully funded roadmap. We have 7 more satellites that will be launched in the next 3 years, so we can guarantee the industry that we will have capacity there and where needed to cope with this growth.
I very nearly forgot to unmute myself there, but I got away with it. Yeah, it's it sounds like the right time to be sending up more satellites, like you say, to enable this flow of data. Now that we've got connected, we've got these efficiency improvements and this money we're looking to save or make through this exchange of data. The last thing we want to do is to have our operations grind to a halt because we haven't properly protected them. So this is where Dan Ung from CyberOwl comes in, specializing in managing cyber risks in the maritime industry. Dan, how do we go about protecting ourselves from the risks that are out there on the big bad internet?
Thanks, Gary. How come everyone else gets an easy question and I get the hardest one? I think the first thing to say is that we should accept that it's impossible to try to set out to protect it 100%. Not only is it commercially illogical to try to do that, but it's also nigh on impossible to try and do that because it just becomes a bit of an arms race, unfortunately. A significantly better approach is firstly one that's incremental, but also one that's prioritized. So we've been talking a lot, Rob and Olaf and Jesse have been talking a lot around the value of data and the value of insights that you get out of it. Well, understanding where the value points are and the critical value points are and prioritizing your efforts around securing that as a starting point and then iterating and increasing it from that point becomes the better approach than trying to do the whole hog in one go. I think the second thing to say is that when we look at sectors that have embraced data over time in history, there always becomes a tipping point. So, and that tipping point is when, and it sometimes isn't so so clear when that tipping point is, but it's there. When you look back in hindsight, it's there. And that tipping point is when we become reliant enough on the data that we start to forget about a world of operations before that data existed. And all of a sudden, all of business continuity starts to be reliant on that data being available, but also being accurate. And that often is also the point when the pain of cybersecurity starts to become much more pronounced and much more felt. And so shipping is still, from what we can see, in its early days of that, but it's embracing that head on, and we're moving in that direction. But the good news is we're not yet at that tipping point in lots of different areas of shipping so far as we can see. And so we have the opportunity, I think, in shipping to be able to learn from the lessons of other sectors and actually get ahead of that tipping point to put in the sort of security and resilience in a way that doesn't require us to feel the same pains, if you like, as some of the other sectors that have gone through the same journey. And the flip side of that opportunity, of course, is that the rate of acceleration in which we're embracing this is quite quick. And so we're going to live with a period of time when we're not able to entirely pull out systems and replace them with new, secure, well-managed ones all of a sudden. We're going to have to live with a mix of new and legacy. And so a lot of what we do at CyberAL has been about taking on an approach that says, look, the reality is, on the one hand, we're trying to digitalize and connect as quickly as possible. On another hand, the time it takes to rip things out and replace them will mean that we're living in this hybrid world of new and legacy. So what we need to understand is get better visibility of those risks so we can actually navigate it and prioritize it. And so we focus a lot on monitoring. We focus a lot on analytics to understand where the buckets of risks are so you can get ahead of them and take action where they really matter rather than trying to deal with a long tail of risks. So that's my long-winded way of saying, don't try and do it all at once. Prioritize it, but in order to prioritize it, you need to understand where the risks are, and that becomes a huge part of the science behind it.
And it sounds again like we've got another common theme there of looking at the information that you have, in this case from monitoring, and being able to properly interpret that information and do something with it and inform the decisions that you make as a business. Jesse, was I right when I said that perhaps your model changes the value of data in some way, because really your value add is in the actions that you're taking from that data rather than data itself? Or have I got that the wrong way around?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and I think that we're all on the same thing here. And Dan is also correct in saying if we look at other industries and other sectors other than maritime that maybe have stubbed their toe through this transition already, that's certainly a learning that we've had. What we're focused on is what are those answers that you're used to having that are either riddled with error or taking copious amounts of man hours. As Alberto mentioned, these crews are under a dramatic amount of stress already, and it's not like their regulatory burdens are reducing. And yet staffing in some areas of maritime has gone down. And so what can we do to automate some of these processes? And from there, what are the other answer sets that you've been looking for from, outside of regulatory, based on, your maintenance scheduling? Are you waiting for things to fail? Are you potentially over-maintaining your vessels? There's got to be a better way to look at that. So applying some of these new technologies to the data that's already coming in, because your vessel has the data. It's already telling you a story. It's just, what do you do with that? So dissecting it and going and honing in on specific sections of your business, whether it's operations or maintenance or compliance, or as Olav and Rob had mentioned, how do we look for macro trends in the entire supply chain, and how do we work with ports around where you are in that supply chain to reduce congestion, potentially to automate some of this documentation. These are all the things that we're working on so that you can get back to the answers and get back to running your business more effectively, rather than trying to figure out what to do with all this new access to data. I mean, the access to data is becoming more and more relevant and potentially commoditized almost to a degree, which is good. It's just, what do we do with it to make sense of it? And that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, and Rob, when we spoke before, I think a lot of the challenge on the port side is getting the right information across to the right people that need to know it and can act on it. And DP World have had some projects and products that sort of move in the direction of getting that data to the right people.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I mean, I think that it's quite interesting that around these discussions, and I think these ideas around these, getting these standardizations in data protocols is really interesting, and I think that will of course facilitate our ability to actually, build let's call it a logistics or shipping ecosphere, if you like, on having at least common data that we can share. I think that is definitely something that would be really interested in and are already exploring. I think that'll help facilitate a lot of what our joint ambitions, particularly on this call. I think some of the areas where we need to be a little bit aware is that, in our industry anyway, there are a lot of intermediaries that have actually arbitraged off information, right? And I think this is, if we can somehow move towards a standardization on protocols around data, then of course you'll be able to create these transparencies. But of course, there will be some resistance from some of the more, let's say, more traditional business players in the supply chain that have arbitraged off purely just off information. And I think that's a little bit of the dilemma. And it's how do those intermediaries actually change their own business models and move them from just the old style of being able to sell the information that they have into being able to actually embrace this idea of using the data to give them the information that they need. So I think that's something that's quite interesting. We've looked at it. We're experimenting at some of our terminals and some of our facilities with simple APIs that we can say, okay, we have these sort of information available. It may be just a timestamp of when a container is actually offloaded off a vessel, or it may be a timestamp of when a truck has arrived on the terminal. So we've experimented with some of them where we've built these APIs where we can actually have this information is available, that we can provide it to the market for anybody who actually may want to pay for it. So we're almost trying to say, look, we can sell you that sort of information if you want it, and is there a demand for it? And I think I don't think the market is yet at that stage where we can openly trade data, actually pay for data or information. I think I'm not 100% clear in my own head. I think there are probably technical definitions of what's the difference between data and what's the difference between information. But from a business perspective, I think it's not always so clear. But we're trying to experiment with some of these things. We create these APIs. Information is there. Is there actually a demand for it or not? And we have seen in some locations where there actually is a demand, and there are some people that are saying, okay, look, we would be interested in that piece of information or that piece of data, and yes, we would be willing to pay for it. And at least then there's a recognition that there is a value in that data. The next step, of course, is then setting the price. But at least if you have that exchange and people recognize there's a value, it's a significantly good step. And that's why I go back to the idea of maybe there is, if we can as an industry, we can come across this standardization in the protocols or the definitions that in which we actually share data across the whole of the industry. I think it will be a significant step in accelerating how we can actually put the data to use properly.
And I think standardization is something we're going to come back to after. We're just going to have a short break for an advert. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's another half an hour to go after this. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
As the adoption of IoT rises in the shipping industry, so does the need for a cost-efficient vessel IoT infrastructure that allows ship operators to instantly access, view, and transfer their data. Today's modern vessel has on average 1,000 sensors on board. However, the inability to access and analyze vessel data in real time without using valuable bandwidth is inhibiting the growth of IoT in the maritime industry. Fleet Data is Inmarsat's innovative IoT platform that delivers full visibility of a vessel or fleet's data anywhere and anytime without worrying about the communications cost. Fleet Data collects data from onboard sensors, pre-processes it, and uploads it to a secure, central, cloud-based database via dedicated, inclusive bandwidth over Inmarsat's global network. Data is extracted from the Fleet Data's server via an application programming interface and then accessed from the ship operator's onshore headquarters. The fully customizable Fleet Data dashboard provides a gateway to all data collected on board, and the ship operations team can request information from specific sensors or set up a regular schedule of data downloads. The information collected by Fleet Data can be used by third-party application providers to improve operational efficiency, increase performance, or benchmark data. This allows application providers to get access to thousands of vessels using the Inmarsat network. Fleet Data is the perfect platform for ship owners and managers to embrace the digital future with the ability to access, view, and transfer data in an instant.
Thanks again to our sponsor Inmarsat, and I was listening quite intently to that, and it's brought up even more topics that I think we could cover during the course of the discussion, and hopefully we will. But we've had a couple of questions from the audience focusing on standardization. We've one here that talks about particular standardization protocols. Perhaps is there anyone on the panel that would like to cover work to standardize the data across the industry and perhaps the benefits of where that might take us?
Data
Rob,
standardization. Go ahead.
No, Jesse, sorry.
All right. So data standardization from a formatting perspective is excellent, especially for someone in our business, because if everybody's saying the same thing and everything's labeled the same thing, it makes making sense of that data and putting it into the answer sets much more easy. Part of that is how much do I share with my name on it versus anonymity. And I think that that's something that we can overcome quite well. Is also, sharing the data is valuable even if your name isn't on it, because especially from the selfish perspective of vessel performance, we get to start building models that predict failures or maintenance needs or compliance trends based on aggregated data sets. So the more that's standardized and the more that's accessible is great. And again, you can then benefit as an individual by pooling that and almost crowdsourcing some of that data. But that does start with some of that standardization. So that is a tremendous thing as we move forward in this digitalization journey. That's our 2 cents.
And Rob, perhaps what are the business benefits of standardization across the sector?
Well, I mean, I agree that I think steps forward in standardization would be massive, and I personally am a big believer in that. I think whether it's provided free, I mean, there is no free. So I think from an economic perspective, there is no free. So when the view might be, well, it should be all open source and it should be free access, etc. Well, I mean, there is no free. There never has been. If you're getting some data for some, if you perceive that it is free, then I think you should be asking yourself is well, where or what is the actual cost? And I think there's a lot of analogies with, with Facebook and these, the social media platforms, etc., that you can draw those analogies. We're an asset-heavy business. We invest in assets that are 50-year concessions. They billions of dollars that we put into the ground itself. And of course, we actually provide a service. It in its own right, it doesn't give you the insights into the overall supply chain. But a date stamp when a vessel is tied up alongside, or when a container, as I said earlier, when a container actually lands on the quayside and is now ready for the documentation processes to kick off, right? I mean, that little bit or byte or piece of information has a value. I think we feel anyway, in some of these processes, we're the guys that have invested all of this infrastructure, that there is an element, maybe how do we extract the value from them? Now, as I said, I think in my first, in the intro side, you can extract value through efficiencies. Okay, those are the value that you extract for yourself. You can improve your own processes, etc., i.e. cost. You can reduce your own costs. But there also comes to a point in time where, that you also need to say, okay, well, look, if I'm going to provide a value to somebody else in the supply chain, I have every right and every entitlement to say to them, look, I'm providing you a piece of value. That value should be worth something to you. So please, pay me that. And I think that's a little bit in our industry. It's a little bit of that. How do we? I think that's something we're going to grapple with a while. For a while as we move forward. Is how do we extract the value from this piece of data? And it's not. We're only one leg in that whole supply chain. You have the ocean vessels, you have the terminal operators at origin or destination, you have the warehouse logistics providers, you have the 2PLs, barges, trucking, etc. So there's a lot of players. We're just one part of that ecosystem. So agreeing the standardization, I'm curious as to how we extract the value there.
It's an interesting point, and actually it follows straight after a question from the audience that says that one of the challenges that slows us down as an industry is the idea of monetizing data, and they wonder whether we would progress better if data were more open. I think that we get into a bit of an ideological discussion about that, but will business models come along that sort of force everyone's hand on this? There will be companies that emerge that sort of sweep this aside, and like Jesse seems to be in the process of doing, by making your data less valuable, by actually making the insights from it the core.
I have an opinion if no one else does. I don't know that there's a sweep it all to the side and your data is irrelevant, because that's the core ingredient to any of these answers, right? So you're not getting any of these outputs without the data. There's certainly a cost to collecting and producing the data. There's certainly a cost to then baking that in the bakery and turning it into a cake. So there has to be monetization along the way, but the fair statement is what is that output? And I think that needs to be defined before it's what about this, how much would you pay for eggs versus how much would you pay for flour? It's what are you trying to do with it? What are we trying to make here? And that's not an easy question, right? That's, I think, one of the reasons that this has been a hot topic for, it's a couple of years now. There are still plenty of the industry that are waiting on the sidelines, and it's waiting for a compelling why statement to jump into digitalization. And what do we do with the data? What can the data do for us? And is it worth the spend? So it's not really, is monetizing it holding us back? It's what's the output that's worth spending any money on? And so I think the perspective is in-house, depending on where you belong in this supply chain. What are the biggest pain points? Are you looking for an ERP? Are you looking for vessel management? Are you looking for there are guys that are focusing on niches of this world around commodity trading, pricing. There are guys that are looking at routing optimization. Again, our bailiwick is focused on the vessel's performance and health and optimizing and efficiency gains there. But I think from a business model, part of that is, what our philosophy at IO Currents is to allow you to walk before you run. I mean, how do you eat an elephant? You typically are not prepared to dive in on a really deep, robust solution for an entire fleet for a number of years and pay for it to prove out a model that you aren't totally convinced of. So, we start with the basics. What are some of these? How can you get access to the data to be able to do remote condition-based monitoring at a minimum? And some of that forensics works. And then, but that data that's housed now, it's easy for us now that we've built it to be able to say, okay, here are some of these daily, weekly, monthly, or annual reports that are either required or you wish you'd always had, but you've never really known about. And then let you start taking the pieces that are most important to your business model and walk before you run, and then start trialing some of the more robust AI predictive solutions or proactive optimization solutions. So I think that there's a process to this, but certainly, as has been said numerous times here, and Rob's been a champion of it, nothing's free. But from a consumer's perspective, you've got to make it worth my spend. So that's our perspective.
And I think what you bring up there is a way of overcoming one of these barriers to digitalization across the industry by being able to sort of dip a toe in the water and take things incrementally. Dan, this is something that we spoke about on the security side of things, where there doesn't need to be this sort of monolithic digital security guard that you put in place at the beginning and that's the answer to all your problems. But actually, you can take a more step-by-step approach to dealing with the challenges that you're facing.
Yeah, indeed. And that approach echoes very much what sort of Jesse's just described, and in fact, in many ways, what Rob's just described, which is sort of a value-driven approach to this. But if I step aside from security for a second and go back to this idea of standardization, the standardization at least at two levels, right, and probably more than two levels, but at the very least at two levels. Let's characterize the first level as sort of standardization of the inputs. How can we at least capture the data and in a format that's a way that enables lots of different use cases and to use Jesse's language, to answer lots of different questions. It's a difficult one to get right, but without that standardization, you spend 80-90% of your data analytics effort just cleaning out that data and making bits of data talk to other bits of data, and only 10% of the time actually driving value out of manipulating that data or analyzing that data. That's the wrong place to be in. So and so much of data analytics is that. And going back to this concept that in shipping we've got the opportunity to leapfrog some of those lessons that lots of other sectors have gone through. Why go through that same pain of spending 80-90% of your time just formatting stuff? Makes no sense to me. So I think standardization is going to be a real key bit of unlocking, getting value out of data, certainly at an inputs level. I see in some of the questions, some questions around, does that need a sort of an international governing body to do that? Does that need, why is it being done on a private basis? I think yes, putting some data infrastructure in place or some standardization infrastructure in place is a global, international, and multilateral effort. And if we don't make that investment to do that, you start formatting data, or you start setting up standards in a way that only solves certain specific use cases. Then you got standardization at the other end of that data analytics chain. So you've taken the standard inputs and you've put some clever bits into there and done some analysis, and you get insights out the back of it, or information or insights out the back of it. Now, it's worth us thinking about how we standardize some aspects of that as well, because benchmarking is a really useful tool in shipping. And I think we often think about data and insights as a competitive thing. But there are some aspects of it where when you start thinking about it from the perspective of benchmarking, actually it still fosters a competitive environment, but it enables everyone to benefit from that benchmarking. So we think a lot about benchmarking in the world of security, to bring it back into security, because actually cybersecurity isn't isn't geographically bound. It may be geographically sourced or geopolitically sourced, but it's not geopolitically bound. There's nothing stopping an actor in one country from trying to affect vessels in that are flagged or operated by an operator in a different country that has no geopolitical tension at all with that first country. And so actually we shouldn't be competing on security. And so we spend a lot of our time trying to give the people we work with a view of, look, there's a risk that's manifested over here. We can see it in your fleet as well, and you should start doing something about it. But we can only do that if we standardize the metrics around that, if we standardize the cybersecurity KPIs around that, so that everyone can understand and have a common language around it at the kind of insights and outputs level rather than just the inputs level. And I think that concept works in data for the use cases of, you know, operational effectiveness and voyage optimization and all of those use cases too.
And I think as we move towards that, the more standardized approach, what we're actually doing is not only making the process itself easier and more efficient, but getting rid of one of those excuses that people might have for not embracing digital technologies, which is the kind of the wait and see approach, where they don't want to be left with a Microsoft Zune in their pocket when the iPod is about to come out. Alberto, you must spend a lot of time speaking with clients as you offer their connectivity, but also you've got these other products on top. What do you see as the main reasons that people might be hesitant in adopting these sort of technologies?
Yeah, that's again an excellent question, and I would like to refer to a research exercise that we did a few months back, a report called Digitalisation Uncovered as part of our Inmarsat research program. There, together with the partner, we launched approximately 1,500 interviews, all to people in ship operators and managers in position of making procurement decisions of digital applications. And we asked them, what, among other things, to rank what were the reasons to not adopt or to not embrace digitalization. So the first one, and this is not a surprise, it was the risk of a cyber attack. Second one, lack of evidence of value for money. And then last but definitely not least, and very related to this, what we are discussing now, is lack of standardization and also lack of access or not a straightforward access to real-time data. So that is where the way we see it, the constraints are down to have a secure, cost-effective and cost-scalable platforms that allow to fetch data from the ships, but that allow also to run applications and to assign the safe and right connectivity to its application. Because at the end of the day, the user experience is very much related to the connectivity that an application is provided. Just to give a simple example, you can have the best compression technology, the best video conference platform, and based on that run a telemedicine service or run a training service. But if you are not given the connectivity that your platform requires, there is no way you're gonna provide a right user experience. And with that in mind, that experience and that conversation that we've been having for quite some time with both ends of the market, this is with shipping management companies, the ship operators, but also with third-party application providers. We are stepping in and launching a portfolio of digital services that aim to enable and facilitate digitalization and allow these third-party companies to provide the best service they can.
It sounds like the classic business of seeing a problem and then trying to offer a solution. Olav, are these hesitancies, are these things that you have seen out in the market for these similar reasons? Are these ones that you experience yourselves as Tone?
I think there is a couple of questions. First of all, a couple of questions that comes to mind in here. Maybe we try to solve shipping the industry as one industry. Is it really? Whether you work in the liner industry or whether you work on break bulk or whether you do tankers, it's slightly different modes of transportation. So maybe there aren't one size fit all that. But back again to, I think the crucial part is the value of what you try to do, the value of data, for a better word. How do you justify for yourself that you're going to invest? First of all, I think we all need to explore and be more explorative in our approach, figuring out, okay, where do we think the value lays? What can we do differently to create value, whether that's a saving in an efficiency or improvement in performance? But try to monetize the data per se, to kind of selling them and say, I want money for it, and that's not going to fly initially, at least. It's going to be hard. And we have looked at part of where can we find partners that can help us. And we've been spent time around, and a couple of years ago, we joined a company called, we subscribed to a service from Hilo Maritime. You basically help us on safety, basically telling us where is the highest risk and what areas has the highest impact on safety. And then we need to share our data collectively with other competitors or customers or whatever, or ship owners, managers. So we all pitch in, and then they use their analytics and get it back and say, here's what your risk profile look like for your vessels. This is the areas where you maybe should look at. And this is so you need to be willing to share. You need to be willing to give something away to get something, because most of us has too little data on some of these issues to actually make sense. We also work with the universities in Singapore to look on predictive analytics, kind of figuring out, can we use our own data? And we come to a certain part of it we could do, but we need more than we have today. Not surprisingly, by the way. We work with technology provider. Can you help us paint a little bit picture? What can we get out of the information we have, what we want to do? And I think what Jesse said, it's about condition-based monitoring. Has been around for donkey years in a sense. But the analytics we can put together today is just making it much better than it used to be. We're more accurate, we can more predictive, we can so the accuracy is what we try to do is better than it used to be. So we see what I'm trying to say is we see an incremental improvement in some of the activities we had, used to more data, to more sharing, to better analytics. We also see that we need to spend time for ourselves to figuring out which area is going to make sense for us. And that's what I said initially around how can we improve on vessels turnaround in port. Can I get a vessel? Can we make sure that the vessel leaves the port 2 hours before or 6 hours earlier if we can tune all the services together? Can we get it back again and do all they need to do and then back into sailing and earning money again? Those are the areas where we will look at, and those are the kind of where we need to explore also what can we do differently. And I think some is on our own, really on our own, and some is, as I said, is part of the bigger chain. First, we decided to work on our own part of the chain, on our own logistics, and those we buy services from. At the same time, we are pitching to others to see how can we improve on the non-tangible, but safety is a really an important part of shipping. A safe and reliable operation is really struggling strive for. And there we see we need to work with others to get a traction on it. And I think that as more as we yes, we need to standardize, sure. But we can't wait for that. We need to kind of keep on moving the goalpost and kind of taking the new steps and finding ways of improving. We operate both, as I said, different kind of vessels, and we see there are different approaches in different industries about how the importance of port calls in and out. The liner industries, of course, with containers is important, while the dry bulk is more or less kind of a little bit more relaxed on this issue, because the port is like they are, and maybe not that developed and all that, so it takes longer time to clear. But all the discussion we talked about today is important on a longer term perspective, not only for kind of improving today, but finding out how are you going to connect, what are the standards we're going to use, and how can we share, because I think we as individuals, we need to share data more than we're willing to do today to actually get a drive for it. And that sharing part is kind of, somebody wants to make money out of it. I want to make improvement and save money and be more efficient. So I need some help. And as Jinma is improving there, of course, the bandwidth, I can get more done on board the vessels. But we can't wait for all of this to happen. We need to kind of keep, for all the new development to come, we need to keep on pushing and driving the digitalization on a local scale, individual scale, and as an industry. And I think there is still a lot to be done in that area.
I think as well, we're sort of tipping towards just having 4 minutes left here before our time is up. But I think that introduces the question of what's the consequence of not picking up digital tools. There's quite a lot of talk in the decarbonisation space about how you simply won't be able to be in the market if you don't embrace this trend of decarbonisation. We've talked about a lot of ways of improving efficiency, whether it's increasing the availability of your ship or turning ships around quicker so that you can get more into your port, for instance. Are companies going to be able to compete without this digital competitive edge in the future? Rob, why don't I throw to you first?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I would just like to also add to what Oliver said. I think as leaders in the industry, or I think we have an obligation to keep pushing this agenda. So I do think that we do need to keep pushing this digitalization agenda. And again, I think there's a lot that can be come out of this of sharing information, and a lot of the applications can also be used on the areas of sustainability as well. We're all playing in the same industry. I think it's a vital industry to make the world go round. Excuse the terminology. And I think we do. We need to. I don't think there is any going back. There's no going back from where we are, and we have a responsibility to keep moving forward in terms of this digitalization. And I'm confident that we will make significant progress over the next couple of years.
Jesse, why don't you take this next? And I think this might be your last comment as the time ticks down.
Yeah, I mean, to the original, you can't manage what you can't measure. So the only way to actually measure this and then replicate it, if you've got efficiency gains, whether it's through simply benchmarking best practices or actually analyzing those behavior sets, and what Olav and Rob have mentioned is sharing the data, but also what's the behavior on your best performing vessels, and how can you replicate that? You have to be able to track that, and then to be more than just showing that to the next crew or captain. You have to be able to understand what behaviors actually were built into that. What were the reactions for different sea states, and for different vessels they're on different legs of a maintenance cycle, so they're performing differently. And so it really does come down to the behaviors and the condition of the individual subsystems on every single vessel to be able to make real, consistent, actionable differences to make those improvements. And again, even from a more macro and rudimentary, before you get into all the more advanced features that you can do with this, with the technology that's out there, it comes that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so, no, I don't know that there's a way that even if you did it, you could prove that you did it or repeat it if you don't have some means of digitalization.
Alberto, same question.
Yeah, I think the same. I think there is there's been an acceleration, and it's no longer an option, and it's soon to become licensed to operate. And if we tie this up with the digitalization, with the decarb effort, more and more the consumers eventually are demanding the companies they buy services and they buy goods from to be responsible. And if we examine how the mindset of the consumer has changed for the last 20 years, the evolution is massive. And now I'm certain the companies that are not embracing this and are not responsible and they are not making this target theirs will be out of the market in near future.
Dan, I guess the question for you is slightly different because
I'll take the same one, given we're running out of time.
go for it.
I think, it is possible for you to survive and thrive if you don't want to embrace digitalization. The key questions I think to ask yourself is, what is going to be your new offensive strategy? If you're not going to embrace digitalization, how are you going to differentiate? What is that going to look like? If you can find something, possibly you can survive. And then from a defensive side, how are you going to react to everyone else having information advantage? If you've traded on information arbitrage before in any form whatsoever, that's now going to be taken away. What's going to be your defensive strategy? If you can answer those two questions, all the best. Yeah, you could probably survive.
Great. I think, Olav, I throw to you for the last word.
Yeah. Decarbonization and digitalization go hand in hand. The sustainability agenda is there to come and kind of drive it forward. And there's no, there are certainly be someone who's not really going to invest in it, but for the mainstream to stay competitive, you have to. And the decarbonization is required a lot more data, a lot more monitoring than we do today, a lot more exchange than we do today. Just think about, if you start monitoring the carbon emission on each voyage, you can't do that manually. You need to invest in the digital solution to get it done. So I think we just we are in the we've been doing for a while, but it's going to accelerate, and the decarbonization is going to be a driver, whether you like it or not. That's my and you better kind of get gearing up and create a strategy. I hear what Dan was saying. Sitting on the side. I don't think that is that's an option. Dan, I don't think so. I know there's someone's going to do it, but I don't think it's going to be an option.
Sure. Thanks, Olav. Right. So for our part, events industry data tells us that after 60 minutes, digital audiences basically switch off. So it's time for us to wrap up here, I think. I think we've covered most of the questions that came in from the audience, but if you do have any questions that you want to put to the panel or to myself, feel free to email me at gary.howard@informa.com. If we get a lot of questions, maybe there's an interview or podcast to follow up this to tie up those questions. Don't forget, this session will be available on demand in the Maritime Online Series website, which will probably be where you are right now. Invite your colleagues along who couldn't make it live. And check out the rest of the live and on-demand content we've got across here throughout this month-long series. We've had some sessions. There are more to come. The next live session is next Wednesday, same time. It's Sea Asia Virtual, Progressing Decarbonisation and Incremental Approach. And a quick reminder to let you know that call for entries for both the Seatrade Awards and the Seatrade Maritime Awards Middle East, Indian Subcontinent and Africa, both now in association with Lloyd's List, are still open. Deadlines are looming, so make sure you get those entries in ahead of the deadlines on the websites. Thanks once again to our conference partners for today's session, Inmarsat and IO Currents, and our affiliate sponsor, DP World. Thanks again to you all in the audience for taking part. And until next time, from me and from the panel, thank you and goodbye.